This podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For more information, visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu/podcast.
Academic accommodations are given to students who need help. They are offered by pretty much every academic institution around the country. Today's episode is about how you can, as a law student, get help, how you can get academic accommodations. So first we'll be talking to Rebecca Ross, who is the Director of the Office of Student Accessibility at Widener University in Chester. And she'll be telling us how to get academic accommodations, what sort of disabilities qualify for accommodations, and pretty much the entire process that you would go through. And then we'll be talking to Molly Ackery, who is part of the Registrar's Office at Widener Law Commonwealth, and she'll be telling us about how to put those accommodations into effect. This, I think, is one of the most important episodes that we've ever done, and I hope that this will help someone who maybe needs some help but doesn't want the help realize that it's okay. We're not perfect. None of us is Superman. This is especially true in law school. It's a different level of competition with your classmates. It's a different level of rigor in your studies. So, sit back, listen, and come learn with us on today's episode of Things I Wish I Knew. Our first guest is Rebecca Ross, Director of Student Accessibility Services for Widener University. How are you today, Director Ross?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Now you're director for the Delaware campus, the Harrisburg campus, and Chester.
Absolutely. Yep.
So how many students do you think come under your jurisdiction then?
So for academic accommodations, we kind of break it down into two spheres. There's academic accommodations, of which there are 300 students connected to our office. And then we have housing accommodations for any students who get residential support. And that's probably, it changes year to year, but it's like at 150 right now. So all told 450.
Wow. So what services do you provide to these students?
So it really depends on the student and like what they're coming in with as far as a disability or diagnosis or limitation. The most frequently used accommodation is testing accommodations across the board. A number of diagnoses and limitations can be assisted by having a little bit of extra time on a test. So that's the most frequently used accommodation. Distraction-reduced settings, again, if you have any kind of diagnosis around anxiety, ADHD, anything that talks about focus or processing, which is a huge population we work with, that's also frequently used. But we do all sorts of things. If students need their PowerPoints in a specific format, if they need Braille access to textbooks, if they need things read out loud, so textbooks to be read out loud. So it really depends on what the student's bringing to the table as far as any kind of impacts, but we do whatever we can, right? So like make things work and make people have a quality educational experience.
Yeah. So we talked about extra time for tests a little bit, and how much extra time do you think is the average that a student with help from your office gets on a test?
I would say the vast majority, so maybe 80% of folks with extended time get 50% extended time. If somebody has something that really needs a lot of extra time, they might have up to 100%. So I'm talking about folks with multiple diagnoses, maybe having dyslexia and ADHD, so you kind of need a buffer to get through the words, make sure that you're hearing them correctly, and then also to attend focus-wise, get back on track, do all the things you need to do. So it's usually somewhere between the 50% and 100% depending on the person's profile.
And then some students need help taking notes in class, I know. How do you find note takers for these students?
So we actually do note-taking assistance a couple of ways. The first way is peer note takers, which is what you're talking about. And so what we'll do is we'll email the class, we'll ask students, if you feel like you take quality notes, you would just really have to take a picture of it and send it to us. We use OneDrive now, so students anonymously send us their notes and we make sure the student with a disability gets a copy. But we also use assistive technology for note-taking assistance, in which students use pens that record the audio, they'll sync it with whatever notes they do take, and they can go back and kind of fill in the gaps. If you have like a focus-related concern, and let's say you're writing notes on, I don't know, I'm trying to do law school terminology, it's just hard, trusts or something. You're talking about trust and you realize, oh, I don't know what he said here. I can go back, listen to that specific portion and fill in the notes again. So it depends what's going to be the best suited for the student, but those are the two ways we do that.
All right. And you also talked about housing accommodations.
Yep.
Can you explain what goes into that process?
Sure. So it's actually a pretty identical process to academic accommodations. Students request things. They have to submit documentation that shows this disability limits my ability to live here without the accommodation. And for that, the most frequently used accommodation is air conditioning. So if you have really significant asthma, air conditioning is going to make it so that you can either exist in that space or not exist safely. So that's probably the most frequently used, but we've had recently put Braille into an apartment style living here at campus. We've had students request emotional support animals. We've had students requesting private bathrooms. They have a chronic medical issue. So there's all sorts of things. Sometimes it's just having an extra refrigerator, because if somebody has diabetes, they might need to keep their insulin at a certain temperature and they need the space to do that.
Yeah, and then that only applies to Delaware and Chester because Commonwealth doesn't have on-campus housing.
Sure, yeah.
All right. So then how does a student prove to your office that they have a legitimate disability?
Oh, that's a great question. We have a guideline, we have a guide on how to find the documentation that's going to make the process the quickest as possible. Basically, we look for 4 things. We want to make sure that your doctor identifies your diagnosis and how they came to that conclusion. So for some students, it's really obvious. You know, I've gotten a psycho ed eval. It clearly shows that I have ADHD, and these are the data points that point to it. But sometimes it's a primary care physician who's going based off of an interview. So they need to detail your symptoms, your limitations academically, so how it impacts you. And then if they have any recommendations as far as what that treatment professional would see as being very helpful, it's always nice for us to have that so that we can just say, look, it's really evident in your documentation that this is something that we can support. Let's put the documentation in place and make it happen.
So was that all of them?
Yeah, those are the 4 things. So the first thing, sorry, just to go back. The first thing is your diagnosis, and the second thing is your symptoms and how it limits you. Your third thing is academic specific limitations. So sometimes we might hear like, oh, so-and-so has trouble focusing, but specifically in a classroom, that's going to limit their ability to attend to a lecture. And then the 4th thing is any recommendations they have.
Okay, thank you for that.
No problem.
And so I know for a lot of students who I know personally who have accommodations have decided not to take accommodations in perhaps their first semester, but then took them in the second because they were ashamed. There really isn't any shame in accommodations, but I feel like a lot of students feel that way. Would you agree with that?
I get that feedback pretty frequently, especially in the graduate programs. Students want to kind of prove that they can go on their own. But the downside to that is graduate programs, often the rigor is so intense that if the playing field's not level for you because you have a diagnosis, accommodations are really more necessary than in like a general education program where you could maybe skate by without paying attention 100% of the time. But in a law school, for instance, missing 5 to 10 minutes of a lecture is going to be crucial. So we do get a lot of students come in after midterms, after their first semester, who realize, you know, I really want to do this now. There certainly is a lot of confidentiality in my office, so students can ensure that their diagnoses, all of their personal information is kept very under a tight lid. And the professors, once you do have accommodations approved, they only see what's approved. So they get a letter from my office that says, I've seen documentation and have determined so-and-so needs these things. So it's kept pretty confidential as far as why you're there, but I understand a lot of students feel concerned about being labeled.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in this very competitive world that we live in now, where you're afraid that, you know, an employer might see, and then, you know, they might not want you because you're like damaged goods at that point.
Sure. And I do hear sometimes frequently from professors like, oh, what is this going to look like in an employment world? But honestly, and you know as well as I do that, like in the working world, we're not taking Scantron tests, we're not writing essays in an hour and a half, so it's not the same thing. So we usually do try and keep things very, very confidential in a closed environment. Only the folks that really need to see anything, and it's usually just me and my assistant director.
Yeah. Now, are students ever denied accommodations, and why would they be denied?
So if we're denying an accommodation, and yes, that does happen sometimes, it's either because there's not enough documentation in place. So sometimes doctors will say things like, student told me they have anxiety. And that wording reads to me as that practitioner doesn't feel comfortable saying, I feel comfortable that this person has this diagnosis. They're only saying, so-and-so's told me that they have it. So if I see something like that, I might say, all right, we need to get better documentation, or you need to get evaluated to make sure that that's something that's happening. Other things that can make an accommodation not approved is if it alters rigor. So some students will come in from high school with accommodations that in a higher ed environment we can't do, like having a keyword list on an exam. Well, that really changes the rigor for like a bio exam, let's say, because memorizing the words is what they're trying to measure. They're trying to make sure that you can remember the words. And so giving somebody a word bank probably isn't going to make that the same test. So altering rigor is the other way we sometimes deny accommodations.
Okay. Now, if a student has had accommodations denied and they want to apply again, are they allowed to apply again?
Absolutely. And typically I give them the process to do so as part of that denial. So if they want to appeal the decision, they can always do that. Our provost reviews anybody who wants to appeal a decision, which is completely okay. Like I want to make sure students feel really comfortable doing anything that they have to do to get the things they need. If it's because of documentation purposes, students routinely come back with other documents to start the process over, and that's completely fine as well.
Okay. And then finally, how can Widener students from all the campuses contact your office?
Well, really, I kind of joke around at Widener Days that you can contact me any way that works besides smoke signals, because really, if you're going to email me or call me or show up at my office, somebody will be there and we'll get you to the right place. But we spent a lot of time over the summer changing our website to make sure all the information is there. So if you go to your My Widener account and just search accessibility, you'll get to our site, which is site.widener/SAS. It has all of the documentations to connect to art. So if you want to look, there's a guide on documentation and how to get it. There's the request forms on there. All of our contact information's on there. So you can really find us at any point.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Director Ross.
No problem.
This is really, I think this is one of the most important things for students to know, is that if you need help, that first, it's nothing shameful to ask for help.
Absolutely.
And secondly, that there is so much help out there. There's so many people who can assist you and make you into and help you become the best student that you can be, as
Absolutely.
long as you ask.
Right. Yeah. And I hope students connect with us all the time with this podcast going out there. Hopefully that message is purveyed pretty well. So
Yes.
please come. We are a welcoming group.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again. And
No problem.
I hope you have a great rest of the day.
You too.
It's now time for 5 minutes of unsolicited advice, where we go around the table and give our views and our experiences on topics that affect us all. Today's topic, brief writing. I like to write my briefs in the same way I write my essays. This means that I write in an IRAC format: issue, rule, application, conclusion. I especially focus on the rule and the application, since knowing what the rule is and how the rule applies to new situations is extremely important to writing an effective essay.
Agree, John. I kind of write similar format. I do the basic case name, or whatever easiest way to remember the case name. Simple 2-3 sentences of facts, pick out the rule, and then holding. Outcome is usually pretty easy to figure out just from the rule and the holding. Other than that, basically, I do it the same way they taught us from day one. So,
I don't know. I mean, personally, the first time I did my first brief is kind of the way I did it for the entire rest of the year. The professors gave us like this whole fact procedure, use the rule, write it all down, talk about the issue, then the solution, and then how it was the holding and the rationale behind it. I kind of just continued to use it over and over and over again. And I'll be honest, it really did help me with like writing and coming up with distinct points to talk about when it came to my essays. And so I feel like in that way it helped a lot. In my second year so far, I mean, I haven't been using the same method, but I feel like after you really start getting it down the first year, you can kind of tune your method into your own kind of way to make it better for yourself in the long run.
And now we have from the Office of the Registrar, Molly Ackery. Hi, Molly.
Hi, John. How are you?
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's a very busy time for your office right now.
Yes.
Scheduling's about to occur in about, a week?
Yes. November 21st is registration.
Wow.
Before you know it.
Yeah, for the listener out there, as soon as you start scheduling for the next semester, that means that this semester is just about done, which means finals. So that is why everything is a little bit rushed now, but we get 15-20 minutes that you've carved out for us, Molly, so we're very thankful that you're here.
Sure. Thank you.
So what is the registrar's office?
Basically, the registrar's office is the custodian of your academic records. So we work really hard to make sure that everything related to your records is accurate and everything is confidential and kept safely in our office. We, as part of that, we also oversee the exam period. So we provide support for ExamSoft, and we make sure that any deferred or accommodated exams are scheduled and go smoothly. And then we also coordinate anonymous numbers, and we ultimately make sure that we collect the grades and have everything correct and accurate and safe within our office.
Now, you mentioned that you are involved in the accommodations process. So how does the registrar help with the accommodations?
Well, basically with accommodations, when you're once you're approved for accommodations, we will get the notice as to what your accommodations are. And at that point, we need to work really closely with you so that we can make sure that we are aware of when you're having your exams, and we can make sure that whatever accommodations you need, we're providing. So it's really important when you have, for example, quizzes and midterms that we might not know about, that someone with accommodation will let us know ahead of time so that we can coordinate with the professor and get a copy of the exam and find out what they are requiring as far as time and, whether they have multiple choice and things like that. So we put all of that together. And then during the actual finals period, we make sure that everybody's scheduled appropriately for any accommodated exams that we have.
And how do you help the students reschedule the exams?
Well, if a student needs to reschedule, just basically defer an exam, they will do a dean's action so that they can be approved for that deferral. And at that point, then they would contact us, or Betty Ann Mortensen, who I'm sure you've met.
Yeah.
She would contact the student and make sure that she has the appropriate time and knows when that exam is going to be deferred to. If it's during the exam period, she would make sure she knows your whole exam schedule so that she can make sure you have things spaced out appropriately.
So what is a dean's action?
The dean's action is a request form. It's online, so you can pull it online and do it all electronically, or you can submit a paper version. But that would go to Dean Teplitz, and it's anytime you want to do anything sort of out of the ordinary. So if you need to defer an exam, if you maybe need temporary accommodations, for example, maybe you break your arm or something like that, and you would need extra time. Those kind of things you would do through a dean's action request, and then once Dean Teplitz approves, the dean's action will go to all of the affected offices so that we can know what we need to provide as far as services.
Yeah, and the process with Chester to get accommodations takes a couple weeks. So you can get a dean's action request for temporary accommodations while those decisions are pending.
Right. If you're waiting on word from Chester and exams are coming up, or you have a quiz or midterm coming up, you should do a dean's action to, request from Dean Teplitz some temporary accommodations, especially if it's just kind of in the paperwork process.
So does every student with accommodations have to complete a dean's action request?
Not necessarily. If you go through the Disability Services Office and you're approved, then we get record of basically what the accommodations are. And so at that point, you're approved. You don't have to do a dean's action. We will just go by what you tell us when you contact us as far as when your exams are scheduled, when you have quizzes and midterms, and then we'll make sure that we have those accommodations prepared.
Yeah, and there is a cutoff date. There's a deadline to get all of your accommodations in, right?
There is, but it's kind of it's a flexible deadline. So, I would say if you're looking to get accommodations and you know that they're coming through, try to stick to the deadline, try to work on it as soon as you can. But if something comes up and you can't, something last minute comes up, it's something you can talk to Dean Teplitz or Betty Ann about to kind of massage that deadline.
Yeah, you guys are very open to working with the students, I found.
Yeah. And as you know, Betty Ann is wonderful to work with, and she will help you in any way she can with, if something comes up, there's always a way that we can work with you.
Yeah, no, I work in the administration building on Thursday mornings as a receptionist, and I'm in either Betty Ann or Jessica Schuler's office every Thursday. It's like, well, Betty Ann, it's time for our meeting.
Well, and Jessica's great because she's very well versed in ExamSoft. So, if there's any problems with that piece of it, she can always help you. And again, it's great to be prepared. So you want to try, you want to identify problems with ExamSoft before they happen, before the exam period, by doing the mock exam and, making sure you download your exams ahead of time.
Yeah. And so how long of a process does it take for a student to reschedule everything and get a new room if they need a new room?
It's really not long at all. It takes, a day. If you want to defer exams, Dean Teplitz is great about, getting things looked over and approved in a timely manner. So I would say only, 1 or 2 days. It's always good to think ahead and know what you need, and do that before the last minute. Last minute's hard, especially during the exam period, but if you give it 1 or 2 days, you should be good.
Yeah. Yeah, because you guys are so busy. Because how many students do we have here at Harrisburg?
Right now, we have about 322. That was our census number.
That's a lot of tests and other things to work on.
Well, when you figure that those 322 students are each taking 4 or 5 exams, you're talking about a lot of exams coming through our office, and then they're all anonymous. So, then it's even that adds another wrinkle to the picture.
Yeah. Well, you guys do a great job, and you're involved in so much. The registrar really, I think, makes this place work.
It's kind of like we're in the background working on the logistics. We may not be in the front of everything, but we're back there working on things and getting them together. Yeah,
you keep the whole process going. Well, thank you for meeting with me this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it because we had Rebecca Ross from Chester in earlier on Zoom talking to her about how to get accommodations. And a lot of people might think, well, that's it, then you're done. But there's a whole nother process after that.
Right, you definitely have to keep up with it.
Yeah, and I feel like, and we felt like, if we didn't talk about the second part of the process, that we would be doing a disservice to the listeners. So
right, and it's not difficult. It's just making sure that you're on top of it.
Yeah, just making sure that all of your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Molly.
Thank you.
And have a nice day.
You too.
One of the biggest lessons that I have learned as a law student is to humble myself, to ask for help when I need help, whether it's from the administration or from a professor or from my friends. I hope that this episode will help someone who needs it. And thank you for listening.
Widener University Commonwealth Law School is the Pennsylvania capital's only law school, with 3 specialized centers of legal scholarship through its Law and Government Institute, Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and Business Advising Program. Widener Law Commonwealth offers an exceptional learning experience that is personal, practical, and professional. Visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu for more information.